What would MLK say about CRT? I examined how Martin Luther King Jr. might respond to critics who use specious, ahistorical, and often contradictory arguments against critical race theory. In that video, I also mentioned that King himself was a strong proponent of critical thinking. So in this companion piece, I want to elaborate on what I mean by that and how it relates to King's philosophy of social change. You see, Dr. King believed that true education should develop both a person's critical thinking skills and their moral character. In his 1947 article, The Purpose of Education, King argued that the function of education is to teach one to think intensively and to think critically. The purpose of education, he said, is to enable the individual to bring his own experiences to bear on the data of history and the data of sociology and to form his own conclusions. In other words, students should not simply accept what they are told, but rather learn to think for themselves and to evaluate information with a discerning and self-aware mind. For King, this was especially important in the context of racial prejudice and discrimination. By learning to think critically, individuals could move past prejudices and propaganda and start to see the world more clearly and more justly. As he wrote, the function of education is not merely to teach men to know the truth, but to make them love the truth. It is not merely to teach them to assent to the truth, but to live by the truth. This emphasis on critical thinking enabled King to dismantle the fallacies of segregationist rhetoric by appealing to logic and science instead of emotion or tradition. For instance, when faced with the absurd notion that black people were inherently inferior to white people, King would point out the lack of scientific basis for such a claim and the inconsistency of those who espoused it. Similarly, when faced with the unjust laws and practices of the Jim Crow South, King would argue that they were morally indefensible and that no amount of tradition or custom could justify them. Moreover, King's commitment to nonviolent resistance was also rooted in his belief in critical thinking. He understood that true courage was not the absence of fear, but rather the willingness to act despite the presence of fear. And he encouraged others to cultivate the courage to face down injustice, even in the most difficult circumstances. Indeed, his famous letter from Birmingham jail is a powerful example of this kind of courageous thinking, as he uses deductive reasoning to expose the moral bankruptcy of unjust laws and challenge the moderate clergymen who urged patience over protest. In conclusion, Dr. King's philosophy of critical thinking was a potent weapon against the forces of injustice. By emphasizing the importance of logic, evidence, and reason, King was able to cut through the rhetoric and propaganda of the segregationists and expose the truth of their arguments. At the same time, he never allowed his commitment to justice to override his compassion for his fellow human beings. For King, critical thinking was not just about being able to analyze and critique, but also about being able to empathize and understand. In the end, it was this combination of rigorous intellect and deep humanity that made Martin Luther King Jr. such a powerful force for social change.